Who will you vote for?
Ian Smith.
Why?
Every time, because I think he's the right man for the job.
What if he suggests an internal settlement, blacks in his government?
I think it might work, providing we don't get any interference from the outside world.
I would vote for an internal settlement, yes, if it's possible.
Why?
Simply because I feel that something's got to be done. This thing drags on and on over the months, and I think an internal settlement would show to the world that we are trying to achieve some results.
What if he says that he wants to have an internal settlement with black politicians?
Well, I think it's a good idea.
You don't mind?
No, no. It's got to come anyway.
Of which, about this election, we don't like it. You get what I mean? Simply because, in our opinion, nowadays, Africans, we are waiting for the majority rule only.
And only that?
That's all.
First reactions in Rhodesia to Prime Minister Ian Smith's decision to call a general election on August 31st. The move is Mr. Smith's latest bid to solve the problems facing his 270,000 white minority, but only a few thousand of the country's 6 million blacks will be voting. The election call came as American Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and British Foreign Secretary David Owen met in Washington to discuss new proposals for a joint initiative to solve the Rhodesian problem.
We are determined to pursue our initiative, and
the two ministers had long talks on the subject, with President Carter himself present for one session. Both countries are anxious to maintain the momentum towards a settlement. After the meeting, Dr. Owen was asked to give his views on the election.
It cropped up in the conversation, but I don't think any of us think it's really all that much changed the situation or is particularly new. This is an election taking place, has been called without any warning or discussion with any of us, and it involves 3% of the potential electorate in Rhodesia. We are concerned with achieving a settlement which is acceptable to all the people that would live in a future independent Zimbabwe, both black and white. And of course we're interested and concerned about what white Rhodesian opinion thinks. It's only one aspect.
Relations between the Rhodesian and British governments have, of course, never been good since Mr. Smith's declaration of independence nearly 12 years ago. But they now seem to have reached a new low after Dr. Owen told Parliament he would have removed Mr. Smith from power himself if he'd been able to. The Rhodesian Prime Minister is reported to be so angered by that comment that he's privately told his advisers that there can be no further cooperation with the Anglo-American initiative. Mr. Smith had already come to the conclusion that new conditions were being asked of white Rhodesians, conditions that were not part of the original proposals discussed with Dr. Owen. The election would therefore give Mr. Smith a chance to put his own policies squarely before the white electorate. If they were approved, they would then form the basis of a settlement to be negotiated with moderate African leaders in Rhodesia without reference to Britain.
But without their recognition, sir, it's still an illegal government.
If everything goes according to Mr. Smith's scenario, then the man these crowds are waiting for will be the most important African representative in any settlement discussions. These are supporters of the United African National Council, and they turned out in their tens of thousands recently to welcome their leader, Bishop Abel Muzorewa, returning home after a 6-week foreign tour. The bishop has called for a conference of black and white leaders to decide who should be allowed to vote under a new constitution. He himself believes in one man, one vote, but doesn't insist Mr. Smith accept this before a constitutional conference. Mr. Smith wants to retain property and educational qualifications that would considerably reduce the size of a future African electorate. Bishop Muzorewa's main rival for African support in Rhodesia is this man, the Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole, also a moderate, which is why he's been allowed back in the country after a 3-year exile, mainly in Malawi. His supporters sing loudly, but they're far less numerous than those of the bishop. Mr. Sithole lost no time on his return organising a campaign to build up support. It began with a motorcade through the townships. But disappointingly for Mr. Sithole, many Africans seem to prefer drinking their beer to listening to his speeches. Despite frantic work by his organisers, attendances remained fairly small. Militant African leaders outside Rhodesia are contemptuous of these efforts to raise support, and some even go as far as claiming that Mr. Smith is trying to groom Mr. Sithole as a future puppet president of Rhodesia. It's a charge Mr. Sithole strongly denies.
I'm not aware of that. I don't think that Mr. Smith has in any way in the past tried to groom me. He tried to destroy me. I think that is quite clear. History has it that way.
Can you see yourself filling the vacuum of power that exists now among the black moderates in this country?
Yes, I see myself in that light. Quite correct. And one of my major roles, which I hope I will play, is to inspire as much confidence as possible among the blacks, the whites, the Asians, and the coloreds. I would like to see a prosperous, independent Zimbabwe. I would like to see this country becoming a home of all races, sexes, people of different faiths, and so on.
Mr. Sithole was once regarded as white Rhodesia's public enemy #1. He spent many years in detention and was accused of plotting to kill Mr. Smith and other white leaders. But he's now renounced terrorism and talks increasingly of the need for reconciliation. The same's not true of Joshua Nkomo, who, with Robert Mugabe, is a leader of the Patriotic Front, the organisation behind the guerrilla armies operating from Mozambique and Zambia. In a recent policy speech in Lusaka, he restated his conviction about the need for military struggle.
Away with it. If the British refuse to use their arms, we shall get arms. That is why we went round the world. We made our position clear to the Western world that we need arms to suppress a rebel of rebels. Because we are not fighting to destroy Zimbabwe. We are fighting to destroy the destroyers of Zimbabwe, the destroyers of the nation of Zimbabwe. That is Ian Douglas Smith and his kind. Our war is not against white people. It is against an evil system. This evil system is controlled by persons of white skin, and thereby creating an impression in the minds of the masses that the people who are causing this destruction of human life are white people. And yet I do believe myself that there are a number of people of white skin in that country who would make very good citizens of Zimbabwe. But because
the range and quality of the Patriotic Front's weaponry can be judged from the arms and ammunition captured by Rhodesian troops after raids on training camps in Mozambique. At several displays like this, Rhodesian troops have shown off various items with Chinese and Russian markings. Moderates like Bishop Muzorewa and Mr. Sithole agree that most Africans support the military struggle, but they also claim that if a settlement with them could be negotiated, the war would be unnecessary. The big question, of course, is would a civil war follow such a settlement? Bishop Muzorewa.
Well, I think that as long as the OAU and everybody else is cheated by believing that Mugabe and Nkomo have united, they are giving them chance, as they are doing, to build themselves in order to fight each other.
Any settlement, in your opinion...
Mr. Sithole believes that Messrs. Nkomo and Mugabe should be allowed a role in future discussions.
Well, if I said I excluded the Patriotic Front, then I would be as criminal as the Patriotic Front itself.
In what way, sorry?
It is wrong, it would be wrong on my part to try to isolate one particular group in my favor. But what is important to me and to all of us is that whatever settlement we arrive at, that must be based on one man, one vote. It must be a settlement that effects a total transfer of power from the minority to the majority.
So you would accept a Patriotic Front coming into this country to take part in free elections?
Certainly, I would.
Among the whites, too, there are disagreements. The Rhodesian Action Party is running for the first time at these elections. It was formed by 12 members of Mr. Smith's ruling Rhodesian Front, who were expelled earlier this year because they opposed Mr. Smith's reforms of Rhodesia's race laws. They claim they're not a party of die-hard right-wingers, although opinion in and outside Rhodesia has branded them as such.
Adam, send your address. Evander.
The Rhodesian Action Party wants the country's different racial groups to run their own affairs in their own areas, a kind of federal system that at first sight at least looks like something similar to South Africa's apartheid structure. The party does not believe that simple black majority rule is either necessary or desirable in Rhodesia.
You have a lot of people coming into you, joining? Yes, we have. Hundreds, thousands? Hundreds. Hundreds, oh dear.
We asked the party's leader, Ian Sanderman, to sum up his policies.
The average Rhodesian in this country, whether he be black or white, is wanting stability. He's wanting to get rid of terrorism, and he is wanting to be able to get back to his old way of life. I'm not suggesting for a moment that the way of life in Rhodesia will ever return to what it used to be in the so-called colonial days. This is something which will never ever occur again. We are proposing a federal approach whereby each ethnic group or each group of people will have full autonomy in their own areas in any matters which are particularly sensitive, such as education and health. And we believe that this is a better approach and a more acceptable approach than the broadly based government approach which has been put forward by Mr. Smith.
Why, I mean, what are you asking the people in this country to support you, that Mr. Smith can't do equally as well?
Well, we are asking for a stronger line to be taken against terrorism in this country.
I mean, how much stronger line can you take? You're at war with them.
We are at war, and we are fighting a war on the borders. But as an example, the other day in Shibane, there were some children who were shot by terrorists. Now, the terrorist gang who shot those children have been proved to be supporters of ZAPU. And ZAPU's leader is Mr. Nkomo. And yet, on the other hand, one of his right-hand men only last week came back into the country and was accepted, and he is free to move around and spread his philosophies. And it was, in fact, his own supporters who shot children at Shibane.
So when you go to the polls on election day, what is the difference between you and Mr. Smith?
Right, well, first of all, a harder line against terrorism within the country. In the northern areas and in the eastern areas, which are those which are most affected by terrorism, I believe that we have probably got to require martial law to control fully the situation in those areas.
In those areas of the east and northeast bordering Mozambique, martial law may not yet exist, but several communities have taken their own military precautions. This tea estate at Nyanga has become a fortress with a defensive system that's cost £500,000 to install. Along the perimeter fence patrol armed guards from the estate's own private army, volunteers recruited from the plantation's labor force. Anyone traveling outside the fence does so in the specially adapted anti-mine vehicles, strange looking but effective. The workers at Nyanga have good reason to be careful, because it was from here last December that 27 labourers were taken by guerrillas and massacred at the gates of a neighbouring plantation. After that, most of the workers would have probably abandoned their jobs were it not for the security offered by the new Defence Force, which has received a brief period of training from black soldiers in the Rhodesian army. Already this year, the Guards have fought off 3 attacks on workers in the fields. The Mozambique border lies less than 2 miles away. The guerrillas said they killed the labourers for working for a white employer who paid them slave wages. And so these workers, who get paid according to how much they pick, now carry a written certificate of their guaranteed minimum wage in the hope of placating any guerrillas they encounter. The managers of the estate have the use of a clubhouse, which is now included in the routine visits by army patrols. Behind the fountains and tennis courts and around the swimming pool, more defences remind the members of their vulnerability. The club's chalets have grenade screens over their windows, and fewer members these days venture very far onto the sprawling golf course beside the clubhouse. Elsewhere along the Mozambique border, farmers are trying to cope with another feature of the war, cattle stealing, and to combat it, some ranchers have hired their own marksmen. Mike Pryor, for example, is a guerrilla hunter. He's paid to kill, and he's paid well. £2,000 a body, 1,000 from the Rhodesian government and 1,000 from his employer, the ranch owner. Not that he has to produce the body to claim his bounty, only the right ear from it. It's left to his own discretion whether anyone he sees in the bush after the evening curfew is a terrorist or just someone a little late going home. He patrols at random nearly 90,000 acres with his Shona tracker Justiri, never at the same time 2 days running, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. An ex-regular soldier in Britain's Grenadier Guards, Mike Pryor served in Cyprus during the emergency and has fought under other colours in other people's wars. He says his presence is a deterrent. Before he came, the ranch owners were losing thousands of pounds worth of cattle a month. But since he began a month ago, he says, they've not lost any. On footpaths, known to be used by guerrillas, he places his own style of booby trap. 2 hand grenades, joined by a taut nylon cord, camouflaged on each side of the path. But most of Mike Pryor's work is watching and waiting, at a vantage point from where he can see the paths leading from the tribal trust lands into Mozambique. Here he waits for the shot that will make him £2,000 richer. He's aware by now that the guerrillas are just as anxious to kill him as he is them.
I don't class myself as a bounty hunter. I'm just a security force. I get paid to do a job, and any bonus is an incentive bonus more than being just a bounty hunter. No, I'm not a bounty hunter.
Must be a big temptation to shoot anybody here, whether he's a rustler or a terrorist, a guerrilla. I mean, there must be a big temptation with £2,000 a head.
Well, yeah, there sure is. Believe me. But I have a good tracker, and he keeps me on the straight and narrow as to who I should shoot and who I shouldn't shoot. He knows them. After all, he's from their tribe, so he knows every one of them. And he knows a rustler, a terror, or a guy that works for us.
In a few days, another 3 guards like Mike Pryor will begin work in the area, just as anxious to make money. Just how long they can operate here is debatable, especially as elsewhere along the border, farmers are moving out. Mayo's not typical of Rhodesia, but it is an example of the worsening security situation in the border zones. Mayo is being evacuated. The homes of white farmers who grew tobacco, cotton and maize are falling apart, and the empty farm buildings are being blown up by the security forces to prevent the guerrillas using them as shelters or ammunition stores. Mayo has only 21 white families left. The Flanagan family is one: Noel, his wife Jackie, and their 14-month-old son Leonard. Security precautions are part of their daily lives. The anti-rocket shelter is a prominent feature of their living compound behind the high wire fence. Recently, the Flanagans began rationing food supplies to their African workers. Each family gets only enough maize flour for one day. It's the Flanagans' way of preventing the guerrillas from raiding the village for food. Where such raids have occurred, they've often meant intimidation and torture for the villagers. Noel Flanagan's day begins at 6:30 when the gates of the compound are opened. Every morning of every week, he shows his presence somewhere on his land. He's aware the further he goes from the farmhouse, the more vulnerable he is. Zingari is his best tracker, and with his help, he's learned what signs to look for that would indicate a presence in the bush.
See, this will give you a perfect imprint. If you can get hold of this spoor early in the morning, giving you about 5 or 6 hours before the sun actually dries it up. Now this is the type of thing that these blacks are looking for. Any disturbance of any wet grass, spider webs, leaves, anything that can hold a track and will show up a track immediately.
Noel Flanagan knows that the security forces have estimated there are 80 or more guerrillas in the area around his farm. So he inspects every mark carefully on the paths that crisscross his land.
There's the latest one. Look how sharp the contours of that print is.
And after 3 days it's kept it.
Very well, but you can see how it has worn, you know. But now look at that, it's quite sharp, it stands out.
Noel Flanagan didn't see any guerrillas on this patrol and didn't expect to. They hide during the day, he said, and attack only at night. But he's certain they're here and may even have seen him go by. Why then did he stay on?
Oh, this is part of life, isn't it? This is good. I enjoy it, and I think most farmers do. Look, we are concerned with just doing our job, farming. Tears, little upsets like we've had now are incidental. They're just part of a day's work, really. And I think most people in farming and also in Rhodesia feel this way. As I was telling you, as far as I'm concerned, terrorism is not a blooming war or a big threat. It's just a blooming nuisance, man. You know, like it's taken a morning's work from me, trying to find whether I've lost cattle or not. I've got to run this up because, as I say, just now they think that, well, this is an easy target here. We can come and steal whenever we like. I've got to run them down. And this is what most farmers are doing at the moment.
Yeah. This is really just showing a presence, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. You. Plus, I know, as you can see, we've covered a small portion of the farm, but at least we've covered it, and then you know that I've covered it twice in this week. So any chances of...
And the important thing is they know you've covered it.
Oh, obviously. They'll see this and they'll think, uh-oh, there is presence here. I've got boys, they're all over my farm just about every day. This is one way of combating this crowd. And I can assure you, they are not giving us as much trouble as they have been in the past. Because we've got so many guys covering. This is one way of defeating these blacks.
And you're sticking it out.
Oh, yeah. Bloody sure.
After 3 hours, he returns home. Jackie's heard that a farm's been attacked in the night and the farmer called Myburg shot dead. With that news, they go into breakfast and prepare to face another day in their dangerous and uncertain lives.